I'm Steve Breaker, Worthwhile Films, and this little bit is going to be about, for do-it-yourself video for nonprofits, will be about editing equipment and some tips for editing. First thing I would say about equipment is, these days, is really your average computer. I would say avoid the pro applications because they are phenomenally confusing, and you can probably use about 5% of the functions, and you have to look at and figure out how not to use all the rest of them. So the most basic advice is, if you're on a Mac, use iMovie or Final Cut Express. They're not great, but they are consistent, and they're not difficult to use at all. On the PC, the equivalent is Windows Movie Maker that I believe comes with most versions of Windows. iMovie is either free or extremely cheap with Macs. I would tend to avoid other proprietary systems. Those kind of are, but I would avoid other proprietary systems and formats, mostly because you can get stuck in kind of a weird format of your video that you end up with at the end that may or may not be usable if you need to move to a professional editing situation or for future use. Realistically, these most common applications, they're so common that they're going to be supported for a good long time. I have done a little research on web-based editing, and based on that, I would say avoid that for now. I'm talking in 2010 here, and every system I was able to look at out there was full of traps. I mean, basically you edit your video online and you then have to pay to get access to it. And it is also in a proprietary format. So I would say they appear attractive, but I would encourage you to stay away from them. Okay, just some tips about how to approach editing. Begin editing before you're done shooting. Again, this depends on what kind of video you're doing, but if you're doing interviews, take your first couple of interviews and start editing them so you get a sense of how that works. I presume you're new at this, and you will learn things from editing those interviews that you can then apply to your technique for doing other interviews. And you'll also learn how well you're covering certain topics, and where there might be gaps in your coverage that you can address more with other people. In another piece here, I hopefully have talked about planning, and I would encourage you to edit as close as you can to the original concept you had first. And it's always going to change. Even when you're planning, it's going to change. But try to edit to that original concept and be as true to your own vision as possible, and then see what things need to change. Absolutely avoid gimmicks and effects unless, again, rules are made to be broken, but think really carefully before you use wild flip effects and things. I would encourage you to just be as straight and natural and straightforward as you can with your audience, and let the story carry itself. Ideally, the viewer doesn't want to notice anything you did in editing. They want to just receive what your message is, and not have to think, wow, how did they do that thing there? Seek out outside help if needed. There are many cases where a person will shoot something and they need help editing, and there are fantastic things can come out of that, especially if you learn some tips about shooting from another video here. In documentary, generally edit the dialogue first, and then kind of build visual stories that back that up. what is generally called B-roll, illustrative footage you can use to stick in and kind of cover your boo-boos and also illustrate points that you're trying to make. If you're using graphics and music, tie those in last. Those usually end up being kind of the glue that holds the various pieces together. And remember, just keep in mind the feeling that you wanted to give people from the very start. That unless it's very technical training you're trying to do, there's something you're trying to get across that may or may not be explicit, but a feeling, giving them the right feeling about the organization, about the topic. Just always keep that in mind. And that's all I have to say about that.